The morning Clara O'Malley woke to find her husband gone along with their life savings, she thought nothing in the world could ever hurt more. She stared at the empty side of the bed, the open drawer where his clothes had been, and the small lockbox she'd discovered pried open and emptied of every dollar they had saved over 5 years of marriage. A cold April wind blew through the poorly sealed windows of their small Colorado homestead, carrying with it the bitter chill of betrayal that seemed to settle deep in her bones. Clara had come west from Boston in 1875, filled with dreams of adventure and prosperity, only to find herself stranded in the unforgiving territory of Colorado 3 years later. At 25, she was now alone with nothing but a nearly barren cupboard, a small homestead claim she couldn't possibly work by herself, and the mounting debts her husband James had secretly accumulated while gambling away their future. "That lying, thieving snake," Clara whispered, her fingers tracing the note he'd left behind. Just 4 simple words scrawled in his familiar handwriting. "Don't try to follow." Clara crumpled the paper in her fist, surprising herself with the sudden surge of anger that replaced her initial shock. She'd trusted him completely, believed every promise he'd made about their future together. Now she had nothing, not even the train fare to return east to what remained of her family. Moving to the window, Clara looked out at the spring landscape. Their small homestead sat on the outskirts of Bristlewood, a growing settlement where the railroad had recently established a stop. In the distance, she could see the smoke from the town rising against the backdrop of towering mountains. She had $3 hidden in her sewing basket, food enough for maybe a week, and a decision to make. By noon, Clara had fashioned a plan. She would go into town, speak to Sheriff Wilson about James's theft, though she held little hope the law would recover her money. Then she would seek whatever work she could find to sustain herself until she determined her next move. The walk to town was just over 2 miles, and Clara made the journey with determination fueling each step. Bristlewood had grown considerably in the 3 years since she'd arrived. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted a hotel, general store, saloon, and various other establishments catering to the steady stream of settlers, miners, and cowboys passing through. The sheriff's office was located just off the main street, a modest building with a small jail attached to the rear. Sheriff Wilson was sympathetic, but not particularly encouraging. "I'm sorry, Mrs. O'Malley, but your husband could be halfway to California by now," he explained, scratching at his gray beard. "I'll put out some notices, but I wouldn't count on seeing that money again." Clara nodded, having expected as much. "Thank you for your time, Sheriff." Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on the dusty street as Clara contemplated her next move. The Silverado Saloon was hiring a server, according to a notice in the window, but the thought of working in such an establishment made her hesitate. Her gaze drifted to the mercantile, where perhaps Mrs. Jenkins might need help with inventory or sales. Before she could decide, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. A small herd of cattle was being driven through town, led by a trio of cowboys. They guided the beasts expertly, keeping them moving past the buildings without incident. The lead rider, tall and broad-shouldered, controlled his horse with easy confidence. Clara stepped back onto the boardwalk as they passed, noticing how the dust kicked up by the cattle swirled in the air. When the herd had moved on, she smoothed her skirts and continued toward the mercantile, unaware that her life was about to change once more. Mrs. Jenkins was indeed in need of help, though she could only offer work 3 days a week. "It's not much," the older woman admitted, "but it's honest pay, and I could throw in some store goods now and then to supplement." Clara accepted gratefully, arranging to start the following day. With that small victory secured, she decided to use a few precious cents to purchase flour and beans before heading home. As she counted out her meager coins, she became aware of someone entering the store behind her. "Afternoon, Mrs. Jenkins," came a deep voice. "Got that order ready for the Diamond K?" "Just about, Mr. Lawson. Give me a few minutes to finish with Mrs. O'Malley here." Clara turned slightly, getting her first good look at the man. He was one of the cowboys she'd seen earlier driving cattle, though now without his wide-brimmed hat. She could see his features more clearly. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark blonde hair was in need of a trim, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. "No rush. he replied, his gaze shifting to Clara. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. Pardon me, madam, but aren't you James O'Malley's wife? Think I met you both at the Founders' Day dance last year. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. News of her husband's desertion hadn't yet spread through town, and she wasn't eager to be the subject of local gossip. Yes, she answered simply, not volunteering more information. Mrs. Jenkins finished wrapping Clara's purchases, her expression sympathetic. Clara's going to be helping me in the store a few days a week, she explained to the cowboy. She's got quite an eye for organization, and I'm not getting any younger. The man nodded, his eyes still on Clara with a hint of curiosity. Owen Lawson, he introduced himself, touching the brim of the hat he held in his hands. Foreman at the Diamond K Ranch. Clara O'Malley, she replied with a slight nod, gathering her parcels. If you'll excuse me, I should be getting home before dark. Owen stepped aside to let her pass, but as she reached the door, he spoke again. Mrs. O'Malley, if you're headed back to your homestead, I'm riding that way. Would be happy to offer you a ride. Clara hesitated. The walk home seemed longer when contemplating it with her packages, but she was wary of accepting favors from strangers, especially men. Still, Owen Lawson had a forthright manner that didn't set off the alarm bells James's charming smile had managed to silence for too long. That's very kind of you, Mr. Lawson, but I wouldn't want to inconvenience you. No inconvenience at all. I need to check on a stretch of fence near your property anyway. He turned to Mrs. Jenkins. I'll come back for that order tomorrow, if that suits. With the matter settled, Clara soon found herself perched on the saddle in front of Owen, her packages secure in his saddlebags. His horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, carried them both with ease. Clara sat stiffly, uncomfortable with both the physical proximity to a man she barely knew and the sensation of being so high off the ground. Relax, Mrs. O'Malley, Owen advised, his voice close to her ear. Rusty here is as steady as they come. Just lean back a bit, so you're not fighting his rhythm. Tentatively, Clara allowed herself to settle, finding that his advice made the ride considerably more comfortable. They traveled in silence for a while, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the rolling landscape. Beautiful country, Owen remarked eventually. Been here long. 3 years, Clara replied. We came out from Boston after the Panic of '73 made jobs scarce back east. Quite a change, I imagine. Yes. Clara wasn't inclined to elaborate on how James had painted vivid pictures of the fortune they would make out west, promises that had evaporated like morning dew under the harsh reality of frontier life. As they approached her homestead, Clara felt a renewed sense of despair at the sight of the small cabin and neglected fields. James had been more interested in town life and card games than in working the land, leaving much of their 160-acre claim undeveloped. The few chickens they kept scratched in the dirt yard, and the vegetable garden she'd planted was in need of attention. Owen brought the horse to a halt near her front door. Here we are, Mrs. O'Malley, he said, dismounting first before reaching up to help her down. His hands were strong and calloused as they gripped her waist, setting her gently on the ground. Thank you for the ride, Mr. Lawson. Clara retrieved her packages from his saddlebags. Owen stood for a moment, looking around the property with a critical eye. If you don't mind my saying, madam, this land has good potential. Shame it's not being worked properly. Clara stiffened. My husband has been occupied with other matters. A shadow crossed Owen's face, and for a moment, Clara wondered if he knew more about James's activities than he let on. The Diamond K was one of the largest cattle operations in the county, and its hands were frequent visitors to town. It was possible Owen had seen James at the card tables or heard rumors. Well, Owen said finally, if you need any help around here, the offer stands. Diamond K isn't far, and I come this way often enough. That's very kind, but we'll manage. The words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Owen nodded, not pressing further. He mounted his horse with practiced ease. Good day, Mrs. O'Malley. As she watched him ride away, Clara felt a weight descend upon her shoulders once more. The brief respite of human company only highlighted how isolated she truly was. Inside the cabin, Clara set about preparing a simple meal. Her mind was filled with calculations how long her current supplies would last, how much she might earn at the mercantile, what she could possibly sell to keep herself afloat. The wedding ring on her finger caught the fading light, and with sudden resolve, she slipped it off and placed it on the table. It wouldn't bring much, but it was a start. That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the wind and contemplating the irony of her situation. She had married James to escape the uncertainty of spinsterhood, only to find herself alone anyway, but now burdened with debts and responsibilities she'd never anticipated. When sleep finally claimed her, her dreams were filled with images of playing cards raining down around her like autumn leaves, and James's face transforming into that of a stranger. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Clara rose early to tend the chickens and salvage what she could from the vegetable garden before walking to town for her first day at the mercantile. Mrs. Jenkins proved to be a fair employer, and the work organizing inventory, helping customers, and keeping the ledgers was engaging enough to distract Clara from her troubles. It was mid-afternoon when the door opened, and Sheriff Wilson entered, his expression grave. "Mrs. O'Malley, got a minute?" Clara set aside the bolts of fabric she'd been arranging. "Of course, Sheriff." They stepped outside onto the boardwalk, and Wilson removed his hat. "I'm afraid I've got some news about your husband. Got a telegram from the sheriff in Pueblo. Seems James was caught trying to board a train with a ticket to San Francisco. He resisted arrest and—" The sheriff paused, choosing his words carefully. "There was an altercation. I'm sorry to tell you, but your husband was shot. He didn't make it." Clara felt the world tilt slightly. Dead. James was dead. The man she had pledged her life to, who had betrayed her so completely, was gone forever. She should feel something: grief, relief, anger, but instead, she experienced a curious numbness. "The money?" she asked, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. Wilson shook his head. Most of it was gone already. He'd been gambling in Pueblo too, it seems. They recovered about $70, which they'll send along once they've processed everything. $70 out of nearly 900. Clara nodded mechanically, thanking the sheriff for informing her. Back inside the store, Mrs. Jenkins took one look at her pale face and insisted she sit down. "Bad news, dear?" the older woman asked, pouring Clara a cup of tea from her personal pot. Clara explained in a quiet voice, surprising herself with her lack of tears. Mrs. Jenkins patted her hand sympathetically. "You go on home now. Take tomorrow too, if you need it. Grief has its own timetable." But as Clara walked the long road home, she realized grief wasn't what she was feeling. It was an overwhelming sense of betrayal, compounded by the finality of never being able to confront James about his actions. The money was gone. Her husband was gone. And now she truly was alone in a territory that showed little mercy to those who couldn't fend for themselves. The following days passed in a fog. Clara went through the motions of living, feeding the chickens, working at the mercantile when expected, preparing simple meals. The $70 arrived from Pueblo, providing temporary relief but not a solution to her larger problems. The most pressing of these was James's outstanding debt to Gordon Myers, the town's loan shark, who appeared at her door one evening with a coldly polite reminder that he expected payment in full, $300 by the end of the month. "I don't have it," Clara told him honestly. Myers, a thin man with calculating eyes, looked past her into the cabin. "Then I suggest you find a way to get it, Mrs. O'Malley. Your husband signed over this property as collateral. I'd hate to see a widow put out of her home, but business is business." After he left, Clara sank onto a chair, overwhelmed. Even if she worked every day at the mercantile and sold everything of value she owned, she couldn't raise $300 in 3 weeks. The homestead itself was worth more, but finding a buyer quickly would be nearly impossible. The next morning, Clara was startled by the sound of hoofbeats approaching her cabin. Looking out, she was surprised to see Owen Lawson dismounting from his horse. He carried a cloth-wrapped bundle, which he presented to her when she opened the door. "Mrs. Jenkins mentioned you might be in need of provisions," he explained. "This is just some bread and preserves from the ranch cook. Best baker in 3 counties, though don't tell him I said so, he's insufferable enough as it is." Clara's pride warred with her hunger. "I can't accept charity, Mr. Lawson." "Not charity," Owen countered. "Consider it payment in advance. I noticed your north fence is coming down, and I thought maybe we could work out an arrangement. Diamond K is expanding our grazing area, and having a secure boundary between our properties would benefit us both. I could help repair it if you'd allow." Clara hesitated, suspecting this was merely a pretext to offer assistance, but unable to refuse the practical help. I suppose that would be acceptable. Owen's smile warmed his features. Good. I've got the morning free if you'd like to show me what needs the most attention. As they walked the property line together, Clara found herself explaining more than she'd intended about her situation: James's death, the debts he'd left behind, Myers's threat to take the homestead. Owen listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. $300 by month's end? He finally asked. That's robbery, plain and simple. Myers knows you can't raise that kind of money so quickly. Nevertheless, that's what I owe, Clara replied with resignation. Owen worked for several hours repairing the fence, declining Clara's offer of lunch but accepting a cup of coffee. As the afternoon wore on, she found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. The way he moved with purposeful efficiency, the strength evident in his shoulders and arms as he worked with the fence posts and wire, the occasional soft words he spoke to calm his horse when a jackrabbit startled it. When he finally prepared to leave, Owen paused, seeming to debate something internally. Mrs. O'Malley, Clara, if I may, I've been thinking about your predicament. The Diamond K is doing well, and I've put aside some savings. I could loan you the money for Myers. Clara stared at him in disbelief. You barely know me, Mr. Lawson. Why would you do such a thing? Because I can't abide seeing good people pushed around by men like Myers, he replied simply. And because I believe you're someone who honors her commitments. I couldn't possibly accept such an offer, Clara protested, though a small flame of hope had ignited within her. I have no way to guarantee I could repay you. Owen removed his hat, running a hand through his hair as he considered. What if we looked at this another way? Diamond K needs someone to cook for the hands. Our previous cook left last month, and the men are getting mighty tired of my attempts at biscuits. The position comes with room and board, plus wages. You could keep your homestead claim active by coming back to check on it regularly. In time, you'd earn enough to repay the loan and have options for your future. Clara was speechless. The offer was unexpected, and yet precisely what she needed: work that would provide immediate shelter and income, while allowing her to retain ownership of her land. Still, she hesitated. I don't know if I could cook for that many men. I've never worked on a ranch before. Can you make a stew that doesn't taste like boot leather? Bake bread that doesn't break teeth? That's already an improvement over what they're getting now. His smile was encouraging. At least come see the place before deciding. Tomorrow? Clara looked around at her small homestead, the enormity of her problems, and nodded slowly. Tomorrow, she agreed. Owen arrived early the next morning with a wagon rather than his horse, explaining that it would be easier for transporting Clara to and from the ranch. The Diamond K was located about 5 miles from Clara's homestead, a substantial operation with a main house, bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings sprawled across a valley with mountains rising dramatically in the background. As they approached, Clara took in the sight of cowboys working with cattle in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney of what Owen identified as the cookhouse, and the general air of industry that pervaded the place. It was intimidating, but also strangely appealing, a community of sorts, with purpose and direction. Owen introduced her to Mr. Kavanaugh, the ranch owner, a stern-faced man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a handshake that suggested he didn't suffer fools. Lawson speaks highly of your character, Mrs. O'Malley, he said after hearing her story. We can offer $15 a month plus room and board. Work starts before dawn, feeding 20 hungry men breakfast. They get a midday meal and supper too. Sundays you'd only need to prepare breakfast and a cold supper. It was a fair offer, more generous than Clara had expected. The cook's quarters turned out to be a small but clean room attached to the cookhouse, with a window overlooking a meadow where wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. The kitchen itself was well equipped, if somewhat disorganized after weeks of makeshift arrangements. I'll take the position, Clara decided, relief washing over her at having a plan. When would you like me to start? Can you be ready day after tomorrow? Mr. Kavanaugh asked. Lawson can help you bring whatever personal items you need. Yes, I can be ready. On the ride back to her homestead, Clara felt lighter than she had in weeks. Owen explained that he would handle the loan with Myers personally, ensuring the debt was properly recorded as paid. I can't thank you enough, Mr. Lawson, Clara said as they neared her cabin. Owen, he corrected gently, and there's no need for thanks. Good cooks are worth their weight in gold out here. The following day was a whirlwind of activity as Clara packed her personal belongings and prepared her cabin for temporary abandonment. She arranged with a neighboring family to check on her chickens and help themselves to any eggs in exchange. By the time Owen arrived with the wagon the next morning, she was ready, though nervousness had settled in her stomach like a stone. Having second thoughts? Owen asked, noticing her expression as he loaded her trunks. Just wondering if I'm making another mistake, Clara admitted. The last time I trusted someone's help, I ended up married to James. Owen's gaze was steady. I understand your caution, Mrs. O'Malley. All I can offer is my word that this arrangement is exactly what I've described, nothing more, nothing less. Clara nodded, appreciating his directness. As they set off for Diamond K, she looked back once at her homestead, wondering when or if she would return to live there again. Life at the Diamond K quickly developed its own rhythm. Clara rose before the sun each day to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands' hearty fare of biscuits, gravy, eggs, bacon, and coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe, as one cowboy put it. The men were initially curious about the new cook, but soon accepted her presence with appreciation for her cooking skills, which, while not extraordinary, were certainly an improvement over their recent experiences. Owen, as foreman, had quarters separate from the bunkhouse, a small cabin near the main house. Their paths crossed frequently throughout the day at meals, when he came to the kitchen to discuss supplies or menu options, and occasionally in the evenings when work was done. Clara found him to be unfailingly respectful, maintaining a professional distance that both reassured and, increasingly, disappointed her. 2 weeks into her new position, Clara received word that Myers had indeed been paid in full, with Owen presenting the receipts to her with quiet satisfaction. Your homestead is secure, he told her. Take whatever time you need to repay me. There's no interest or deadline. Thank you, Clara said, the words inadequate for the weight of gratitude she felt. I'll keep a careful account and pay you back as quickly as possible. I know you will. His confidence in her integrity was both flattering and sobering, a reminder of the responsibility she now bore to him. As spring deepened into summer, Clara found herself thriving in ways she hadn't expected. The work was demanding but satisfying, and the isolation she'd felt at her homestead was replaced by the constant activity of ranch life. She visited her property once a week, usually on Sunday afternoons when her duties were lighter, ensuring everything remained in order. It was during one such visit in late June that Clara returned to find her cabin door ajar. Cautiously, she approached, picking up a heavy stick as she did so. Inside, she discovered signs of an intruder, drawers pulled open, her few remaining possessions disturbed. Nothing of value remained to steal, but the violation of her space left her shaken. When she reported the incident to Sheriff Wilson in town, he suggested it was likely drifters passing through, looking for easy pickings. Been seeing more of that lately, he explained. Word gets around about empty properties. That evening at the ranch, Clara mentioned the break-in to Owen as they sat on the cookhouse porch, enjoying the cooler air after a blazing hot day. His expression darkened with concern. You shouldn't be going out there alone, he said firmly. I'll ride with you from now on. That's not necessary, Clara protested. I'm sure it was just as the sheriff said, opportunistic drifters who won't be back. Maybe so, but I'd feel better knowing you were safe. Owen's tone brooked no argument. Besides, I've been meaning to check that fence line again. 2 birds, 1 stone. True to his word, Owen accompanied Clara on her next visit to the homestead. They rode together on horseback, Clara having gradually become more comfortable with riding during her weeks at the ranch. The early July day was gloriously beautiful, with wildflowers dotting the grasslands and the distant mountains standing sharp against the blue sky. At the homestead, they found no further signs of disturbance. The neighboring family had continued caring for the chickens, and Clara's small garden, though somewhat overgrown, was producing summer vegetables. She harvested what was ripe, while Owen checked the perimeter of the property. Your land really does have potential, he commented when they met back at the cabin. With the right investment of time and resources, this could be a productive homestead. Clara nodded, looking around with fresh eyes. James never saw it that way. He was always looking for quicker returns, card games, speculation schemes. He had no patience for the slow growth of things. And you? Owen asked, studying her. What do you see when you look at this place? Clara considered the question seriously. I see possibility, she finally answered. I see a home that could be, with enough hard work and perseverance. Owen's smile was warm. That's exactly what I see too. They shared a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and the vegetables Clara had harvested before beginning the ride back to the ranch. Along the way, Owen pointed out features of the landscape, sharing his knowledge of the territory with an enthusiasm that was infectious. Clara found herself laughing at his stories of ranch mishaps and cowboy antics, realizing with surprise that it was the first time she'd truly laughed since before James's betrayal. You have a beautiful laugh, Clara, Owen remarked, the observation catching them both off guard with its intimacy. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. Thank you, she murmured, uncertain how to respond further. A comfortable silence fell between them for the remainder of the journey. As they approached the ranch, Clara was struck by how natural it felt to be riding beside Owen, how easily they had fallen into a rhythm of companionship that required no forced conversation or pretense. Later that evening, after the kitchen was cleaned and the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse or their own pursuits, Clara sat alone on the cookhouse porch, enjoying the night sounds and the spectacular display of stars overhead. The creak of footsteps on the wooden boards announced Owen's approach before she saw him. Mind some company? He asked, holding 2 cups of coffee. Not at all, Clara replied, accepting one of the cups gratefully. The nights could still get chilly, even in summer. Owen settled into the chair beside her, stretching his long legs out before him. I spoke with Mr. Kavanaugh today, he said after a moment. He's very pleased with your work here. Says the men haven't eaten this well in years. Clara smiled at the compliment. It's honest work, and I found I enjoy it more than I expected. He's considering offering you a permanent position, Owen continued. Year-round, with a small raise after the first 3 months. The news was unexpected but welcome. Clara had been wondering how long the arrangement would last, aware that seasonal ranch work often ended with the change of seasons. That's very generous, she said, turning the possibility over in her mind. A permanent position would provide security, a chance to build savings, and eventually repay Owen fully. Yet it would also mean being away from her homestead more permanently. What do you think I should do? Owen was quiet for a moment, sipping his coffee before answering. I think you should consider what you truly want for your future. The position here is secure, and you seem to have found a place among us. But I also know how much your land means to you. It's not just the land, Clara admitted. It's what it represents: independence, a chance to build something that's truly mine, not dependent on someone else's goodwill or decisions. Owen nodded in understanding. There might be a way to have both in time. Continue working here while making improvements to your homestead when you can. Eventually, you might find yourself in a position to return there full-time, if that's what you want. That's a sensible approach, Clara agreed, warming to the idea. I could use my wages to invest in the property gradually, maybe even hire help for the larger projects. They talked late into the night, discussing practical matters like crop selection and livestock options, but also sharing more personal thoughts and histories. Clara learned that Owen had come west from Pennsylvania after the war, working his way up from ranch hand to foreman through determination and natural leadership. He spoke of his parents, both gone now, and 2 sisters who still lived back east with their own families. In turn, Clara told him about her childhood in Boston, her father's death that had left the family in reduced circumstances, and her decision to marry James when he painted such vivid pictures of their future in the West. I was naive, she concluded, believing everything he told me without question. You were trusting, Owen corrected gently. There's a difference, and now you're wiser, but I hope not hardened. Clara considered this. I'm more cautious now, certainly, but I'd like to think I haven't lost the capacity to see the good in people. Owen's gaze was warm in the lantern light. I don't think you have. The following weeks brought a new dimension to Clara's life at the Diamond K. She accepted Mr. Kavanaugh's offer of permanent employment, settling into her role with increasing confidence. Her cooking improved as she learned the preferences of the ranch hands and experimented with the available ingredients, earning her appreciative comments and the occasional good-natured ribbing about fattening them up for winter. Owen continued to accompany her on her weekly visits to the homestead, and together they began making small improvements, repairing the chicken coop, clearing more garden space, reinforcing the cabin's roof before the fall rains came. Clara insisted on paying for materials out of her wages, establishing a clear line between these projects and her debt to Owen, which she was steadily repaying in small installments. As summer turned to autumn, Clara noticed subtle changes in her relationship with Owen. Their conversations grew longer and more personal, their silences more comfortable. She found herself looking forward to their time together with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. After James's betrayal, she had sworn to guard her heart carefully, yet Owen's steady presence and unwavering integrity were slowly dismantling her defenses. One crisp October day, as they worked together stacking firewood at her cabin, Owen paused, leaning on his axe as he looked out across the golden landscape. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I've been saving to buy my own spread someday. Nothing too ambitious at first, just enough to start building something of my own." Clara straightened from her task, brushing with chips from her apron. "I didn't know that. How close are you to your goal?" "Closer than I was a year ago," he replied with a smile. "But still a ways off. Land prices keep climbing with more folks moving into the territory." Clara nodded, understanding the challenge. Land that had once been practically given away was now commanding premium prices as the railroad brought more settlers west. "Would you stay in this area?" she asked, trying to ignore the pang she felt at the thought of him leaving. "I'd like to," Owen confirmed. "I know this country, understand its rhythms." And he hesitated, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I've found reasons to want to put down roots here." The implication hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging it directly, but both acutely aware of its presence. Clara busied herself with gathering smaller pieces of wood, her mind racing with possibilities she'd scarcely allowed herself to consider. Later, as they prepared to ride back to the ranch, Owen helped Clara into her saddle, his hands lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "Clara," he began, looking up at her with uncharacteristic uncertainty, "I've been wondering if you might consider joining me for the harvest dance in town next weekend. Not as your escort to and from, which I'd be happy to provide regardless, but as my companion for the evening." Clara felt a rush of warmth despite the cool autumn air. The harvest dance was a major social event in Bristlewood, drawing people from surrounding homesteads and ranches for an evening of music, dancing, and community. "I'd like that very much, Owen," she answered, surprised by the steadiness of her voice despite the fluttering in her chest. His smile illuminated his features, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Good. That's good." He mounted his own horse with fluid grace, and they set off for Diamond Cay, the future suddenly seeming brighter than it had in a very long time. The night of the harvest dance arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp and clear, with a nearly full moon illuminating the landscape. Clara had used some of her savings to purchase fabric for a new dress, a rich copper-colored cotton that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. Mrs. Jenkins had helped with the final fitting, declaring that Clara looked positively radiant. Owen arrived at the cookhouse door promptly, dressed in his best clothes, a dark jacket over a clean white shirt, his usual work denims replaced by neatly pressed trousers. He stood a little straighter when he saw Clara, appreciation evident in his expression. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Clara replied, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "You're quite handsome yourself." The ride to town was filled with anticipation, the wagon carrying not just the two of them, but also several other ranch hands who had been granted the evening off. At the town hall, lanterns and harvest decorations transformed the usually plain space into a festive venue. A small band played lively tunes, and tables laden with food and drink lined one wall. Clara was surprised by how many people greeted her warmly, not just as James's widow, but as herself. Her regular presence in town during her weekly visits to the homestead, combined with her reputation as the Diamond Cay's capable cook, had earned her a place in the community that she hadn't fully realized. Owen led her onto the dance floor for a lively reel, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a tall man. Clara followed his lead easily, laughing as they whirled among the other dancers. When the music shifted to a slower waltz, Owen's arm around her waist drew her closer, their steps falling into perfect harmony. "I've been wanting to do this for months," Owen admitted quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "Dance with me?" Clara asked, looking up at him. "Hold you," he clarified, his blue eyes serious. "Be with you like this, not as your employer or creditor or neighbor, but as a man who admires everything about you, your courage, your determination, your kindness." Clara's heart raced at his words. "Owen, before she could respond further, the music ended, and they were swept into conversations with other attendees. Throughout the evening, however, Owen remained attentive, bringing her punch, introducing her to people she hadn't met, and claiming her for several more dances. It was during a brief respite, as they stood near an open window enjoying the cool night air, that Clara noticed Gordon Myers across the room, his calculating gaze fixed on them. The loan shark nodded curtly in recognition before turning away to speak with someone else. "Does he still bother you?" Owen asked, following her line of sight. "No," Clara assured him. "I think he's simply curious about my changed circumstances. When James died, he probably expected me to lose everything." Owen's expression hardened slightly. Men like Myers profit from others' misfortunes. "I'm glad you proved him wrong." As the evening drew to a close, Owen suggested they take a short walk before returning to the ranch. The streets of Bristlewood were quiet, most residents either at the dance or already retired for the night. The moon cast silver light over the buildings and the distant mountains, creating a landscape of ethereal beauty. They strolled in comfortable silence until they reached the edge of town, where a small park had been established with benches overlooking a creek. Sitting side by side, they listened to the gentle murmur of water over stones. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Clara finally spoke, gathering her courage. "About admiring me." Owen turned slightly toward her, his features softened by moonlight. "I meant every word. I admire you too, Owen," Clara continued. "Your integrity, your kindness, the way you see possibilities instead of problems. You've helped me more than I can express, and not just financially." "Clara," Owen began, his voice low and earnest, "I need to be clear about something. My feelings for you go beyond admiration. I care for you deeply more than I thought possible after knowing you such a relatively short time." Clara felt a surge of emotion at his confession. "I care for you too," she admitted. "But I'm afraid. After James, I promised myself I wouldn't rush into anything, wouldn't trust so easily again." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I respect that. I'm not asking for promises or commitments tonight. Just the chance to show you, over time, that what I feel is genuine and lasting." "I'd like that," Clara whispered, her hand finding his in the darkness. Owen's fingers intertwined with hers, warm and reassuring. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned closer until his lips met hers in a gentle kiss. It was brief but filled with promise, causing Clara's heart to flutter with a happiness she had nearly forgotten was possible. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts, but with a new awareness of each other that made even silence meaningful. When they arrived, Owen walked Clara to the cookhouse door, kissing her hand in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply touching. "Good night, Clara," he said softly. "Thank you for a wonderful evening." "Good night, Owen," she replied, watching him walk toward his cabin before closing her door, her fingers unconsciously touching her lips where his had been. As autumn progressed toward winter, Clara and Owen's relationship deepened gradually. They continued their weekly visits to her homestead, now with the added sweetness of shared kisses and conversations that increasingly turned toward the future. The ranch hands noticed the change between them, exchanging knowing glances when Owen lingered in the kitchen after meals or when Clara's smile brightened notably at his approach. Mr. Kavanaugh, practical businessman that he was, called Owen into his office one evening in late November. "Lawson," he said without preamble, "your interest in Mrs. O'Malley hasn't gone unnoticed." "No, sir, I suppose it hasn't," Owen replied evenly. "She's a fine woman, and you're a good man. I have no objections to your courtship, provided it doesn't interfere with ranch operations." The older man's stern expression softened slightly. "But I should point out that if your relationship progresses as I suspect it might, certain living arrangements would need to be reconsidered. Diamond K maintains certain standards of propriety." Owen nodded in understanding. "Yes, sir. I appreciate your directness on the matter." That night, Owen shared the conversation with Clara as they sat before the fireplace in the main house. Having been invited to join Mr. Kavanaugh for dinner, a not-so-subtle acknowledgement of their relationship. "He's right, of course," Clara said thoughtfully. "If we were to. That is, if our relationship were to become more formal, my position here would change." "Clara," Owen said, taking her hands in his, "I've been meaning to speak with you about something related to this. I've been saving for my own ranch, as you know, but I've also been considering another possibility." Clara looked at him questioningly, her heart beating a little faster at the serious tone of his voice. "Your homestead has good water rights, decent grazing potential, and with proper investment, could become a viable operation," Owen continued. "I've been wondering if you might consider a partnership of sorts." "A partnership?" Clara repeated, not entirely sure what he was suggesting. Owen smiled slightly at her confusion. "What I'm trying to say, perhaps not very well, is that I love you, Clara. I have for some time now. And I'm asking if you might consider joining our futures together, not just our hearts, but our practical ambitions as well. Your land, my savings and experience. A true partnership in every sense." Clara's breath caught as she realized what he was proposing. "Are you asking me to marry you, Owen?" "I am," he confirmed, his blue eyes earnest. "I know it hasn't been very long since James, and I understand if you need more time. But I wanted you to know where my heart stands." Clara was silent for a long moment, emotions washing over her in waves. Fear, hope, hesitation, and beneath it all, a deep certainty that had been growing for months. Owen was nothing like James. His promises were backed by action, his character proven through countless small moments of integrity and kindness. "I love you too," she finally said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "And yes, I will marry you, Owen Lawson." His face lit up with joy as he leaned forward to kiss her, a kiss that conveyed all the happiness and hope they both felt for their shared future. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch and town. Mrs. Jenkins insisted on hosting a small celebration at the Mercantile, and Mr. Kavanaugh surprisingly offered one of the ranch's vacant cabins for them to use until their wedding in the spring, when they planned to move permanently to Clara's homestead. Throughout the winter months, Owen and Clara spent every available moment planning and preparing. With his savings and her growing nest egg from her work at the ranch, they purchased supplies for expanding the cabin, seeds for spring planting, and even a small herd of cattle to establish their own brand. Clara officially paid off the remainder of her debt, to Owen insisting on doing so before they married, to begin their life together free of such obligations. Their wedding day dawned clear and bright in early April, almost exactly a year since Clara had discovered James's betrayal. The contrast between that dark morning and this joyful day was not lost on her as she prepared in Mrs. Jenkins's home, wearing a simple but elegant ivory dress that the older woman had helped her make. The ceremony took place in the town church, filled with well-wishers from the Diamond K and Bristlewood. Owen, standing tall and handsome at the altar, watched Clara walk toward him with an expression of such love and pride that she felt her heart might burst with happiness. Their vows were straightforward but deeply felt, promises of faithfulness, partnership, and enduring love exchanged with clear voices and unwavering conviction. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen's kiss was both tender and passionate, a perfect balance that seemed to characterize everything about their relationship. The celebration afterward was lively, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the county. As evening approached, Owen found Clara amidst the well-wishers, slipping an arm around her waist. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Lawson?" he asked, his voice low in her ear. Clara smiled up at him, still adjusting to her new name, but loving the sound of it. "Yes, I believe I am." They said their goodbyes and thank yous, then climbed into the wagon Owen had prepared for their journey. As they rode toward their homestead, now Clara leaned against his shoulder, contentment flowing through her. "You know," Owen said as they neared their property, where lanterns had been lit in anticipation of their arrival, "I've been thinking about something you told me last fall, about what you see when you look at this place." "Possibility," Clara remembered with a smile. "Exactly," Owen nodded. "I see it too, the garden expanded, fields planted, cattle grazing, maybe even children playing someday." He glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "I'd like that," Clara assured him, squeezing his hand. "All of it." As Owen helped her down from the wagon, he paused before opening the cabin door. "I know this isn't where either of us expected to find ourselves a year ago," he said thoughtfully. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. Some for the worse," Clara agreed, thinking of James's betrayal. "But some, it seems, very much for the better." Owen smiled, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Clara Lawson," he said, stepping into their cabin, where a fire burned warmly in the hearth and their future waited to unfold. 5 years later, Clara stood on the porch of their substantially expanded home, watching as Owen taught their 3-year-old son Daniel to ride his first pony in the yard. Their daughter Emily, just beginning to toddle at 16 months, clutched at Clara's skirts, babbling excitedly at the sight of her brother and father. The homestead had been transformed in the years since their marriage. Fields of wheat and corn stretched beyond the immediate yard. A substantial barn housed their growing herd, and Clara's garden provided abundantly for their table and for trade in town. They had hired help, now 2 young ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse Owen had built in their 3rd year, and occasionally a local girl who assisted Clara with household tasks. Life wasn't without challenges. Drought had threatened their crops 2 summers ago, a harsh winter had claimed some of their cattle the year before, and the demands of running a growing ranch while raising small children sometimes left them both exhausted. But through it all, they faced each challenge together, their partnership proving stronger than any obstacle. As Owen lifted Daniel from the pony and set him on his feet, the boy ran toward the porch, face alight with excitement. "Mama, did you see? I rode all by myself." "I saw, sweetheart," Clara assured him, bending down despite her growing belly, evidence of their 3rd child, expected in the fall. "You were very brave." Owen joined them, scooping up Emily, who squealed with delight at being lifted high. "What do you think, Clara?" he asked with a grin. "Is our son ready to help with the roundup next month?" "Perhaps in a few years," Clara laughed, ruffling Daniel's dark hair. Later that evening, with the children finally asleep, Clara and Owen sat together on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Owen's arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, his hand occasionally caressing the curve of her stomach where their baby grew. "I received a letter from Sheriff Wilson today," Owen mentioned, his tone casual. "Gordon Myers is leaving town. Seems his business has dried up since the new bank opened and started offering fair loans to settlers." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "It's hard to believe how much has changed. When James left me with nothing but debts, I thought my life was over. I never imagined I could be this happy." Owen pressed a kiss to her temple. "Do you ever regret it? Staying here instead of returning east after everything happened?" "Never," Clara answered without hesitation. "Even in those darkest days, I think I knew there was something here worth fighting for. I just didn't realize then that it would be this, you, our children, the life we've built together." Owen's smile was tender as he drew her closer. "I remember the first time I brought you bread from the ranch," he reminisced. "You were so proud, so determined to stand on your own. And you said you had room for 2. Clara finished, returning his smile. "It seems we've expanded that definition considerably." "The best kind of expansion," Owen agreed, his hand gentle on her rounded stomach. "I love you, Clara Lawson. More today than yesterday, and not as much as I will tomorrow." "I love you too," Clara replied, resting her head on his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Always and completely." As night settled fully over their land, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about plans for the upcoming harvest, improvements they hoped to make before winter, and dreams for their children's futures. Their voices mingled with the symphony of night sounds, crickets chirping, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft whicker of horses in the corral, creating a harmony that spoke of home, of belonging, and of a love that had begun with bread and room for 2, but had grown to encompass so much more.